Hey everybody, welcome back to the next episode of Kicks Over Coffee. This is the election edition. If you didn't know there was an election, you must not have social media, have a television, or look at newspapers. Congratulations, you're probably the least stressed person in America right now. I myself stayed up rather late, not super late.
What time did you go to bed, Andy?
I went to bed at like 11:30.
That's not bad. I went to bed at midnight. Usually it's like 2 or 3, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'll go to bed now. But I bailed out quick.
Yeah, I tried not to stay up too late because I was assuming some of the races were going to go to runoffs anyway, or so this edition in particular, I think our goal here is to explain the election, what happened in ways that you won't find on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, whatever it is. So we'll give you some insights from our background of having done this professionally for many years. And then I think we'll kind of explain a little bit about what it means for footwear, what it could mean, especially with lame duck. And I think Thomas can cover that especially well on that. But Matt, we'll start off with you. What I have my own opinions and theories about this election, but I'll start with you on what you think happened and some of your takeaways right off the bat.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I was wrong. I predicted a bigger Republican wave than what materialized. No wave materialized, essentially. I think going into it, the reason I picked it is because historically all the data was in the favor of the Republicans. You had the first midterm election of an incumbent president who's unpopular. It was around 40% approval rating. Inflation was a 40-year high. A lot of concern about the economy. A lot of crime. It just seemed like on paper, the Republicans had a lot to be optimistic about. And so they even were kind of getting their own optimism and pushing that narrative out there. And then the broad media picked up on it. Like there's this wave coming, like batten down the hatches. And so we all got caught up into it because, data matters. It's all we have is kind of the last election, what the key performance indicators of the economy are and how people were feeling, and none of it was positive. So you have to think, all right, the people not in power are going to come back. What it tells me, Andy, is that candidate selection is so critical, and we will dive into some of these numbers, but you can look at it in Georgia, you can look at it in Ohio and other races where, for example, Governor Kemp won easily, but they had over 200,000 votes in Georgia as of now that voted for Kemp, that voted for Warnock. And that is just unthinkable when you have a good candidate. But when your candidates are shaky or fringe or nuts, that's not going to, Trump got a shellacking for sure. And I think we can get into that, but that's my first takeaway.
What about you, Thomas?
Well, I'm wondering about the turnout and how this narrative impacted that. If, we all said this going into it, that it was going to be a red wave, the press was saying it. And so I just wonder how does that impact the voter? If you're a Republican, or you like, I need to make sure that I get out and vote because there's going to be a red wave. If you're a Democrat, are you scared? And I think to Matt's point, there were a lot of high risk candidates, and then there were distractions election week too. Like Trump, there was this announcement, is Trump going to announced that he's going to run for president? That was the night before the midterm election. Now, of course, you have a lot of mail-in ballots or early ballots, but still, that suddenly is the focus heading into it as well. And he's delayed the announcement. I think it's going to be November 15th when he's going to make some sort of an announcement. But it was on election eve. He was potentially going to do that. And then he's coming in with some of these controversial candidates like Dr. Oz, who didn't win, and then Herschel Walker, who's trailing. You just got to wonder, what kind of an impact that has on turnout heading into the election.
Okay, so here's my thoughts. I didn't watch anything this morning. I just looked at the data. I didn't read anything this morning because I wanted my head clear. So I took my walk and I thought about it. And I've done, I don't know how many campaigns. I can't even count them anymore. And they've been random, right? They've been county commissioner, they've been state house, they've been Congress, whatever. And to Matt's point, I think is the data does matter. It's what we use. We look at what people care about and we message around that in order to drive people to the polls. And then you make these assumptions. So as I was walking around this morning, I was like, how do we get this wrong, right? Not everybody got it wrong. Every professional person got it wrong in the media, And the campaign committees, even the general public had this feeling because of the narrative. So here's what I think. I think if on our guesses that we made in Matt's weekly newsletter, 9 out of 10 times we would be right. Okay. I really believe that because traditional midterms are about issues. But our hypothesis was wrong from the start when we're looking at the data. This was not an issue midterm. This was a value midterm. And so I think that it's just, to me, it makes it a lot different because if I had no assumption that values, not just abortion issues and things like that, but broader values of democracy and issues like that. I think January 6th had an outsized impact on people. And I should have known that based on talking to my wife or talking to friends about how anxious they were about the election. There was a huge anxiety of voters across the spectrum, whatever the party was. And I don't think I factored that in properly. And so, I was looking at it through the lens of inflation or crime and issue driven, probably because we're too close to the issues, right? This is, but there's an emotional part of this election. And I think that's really what it came down to. Was we got it so wrong because it's not an issue election, it was a values election. And this and then I asked myself, like, if I did a Tim Russert, right, like or a Peggy Noonan, what would a voter be saying right now? And I would say, as a voter, this is the whole result. If it's an average person in this election, I don't like where we're headed, but I'm more afraid of where we just came from. And we got to secure the foundations that we got. And I think that was a driving thing of making meticulous choices, as you guys both pointed out, like splitting ticket between governor, senate, whatever it was. But I think that's what it was. I think this is an emotional election and a value-based election. And then I looked at the voters. And this is kind of I guess if there's a clever point that I like to point out for myself and pat myself on the back, I'd say this: the emperor may well have no clothes, but the Republican Party has no soul. And I think that's the biggest thing is like inflation matters. Crime matters. People care about this stuff and they're concerned about it. And they're not quite sure Biden is 100% with it every single day, right? So the emperor has no clue. They didn't run on real issues. They don't have real solutions. So you might say that, right? And some of that is true. But the flip side is, what values did the Republican Party show other than winning? To show, as planks of platform, like where do they stand on these different issues? And so I think, this violence, the concerns of violence, political violence, the concerns of election denials, January 6th insurrection all played into that of saying this party just is denying everything. And like, they don't what do they value? And so as a voter, again, from a voter perspective, as I look at that issue, a voter would say, again, crime and inflation matter, but I'm not happy. I'm not happy about crime. I'm not happy about inflation. But I don't trust Republicans to lead because I don't think they're guided by principles and values.
That's a great point. I think that's a great point.
And then to y'all's point too on the candidates, that's my third point, was like how you dissect it. So I dissect it from an election standpoint of why we missed it and what happened, value-based. Voters, how they were feeling, very concerned about the issues, but these things were more important to be guided by visions and principles and values. And then as a candidates section, I think as a voter, if there was a voter's voice, they would say, these are really serious times. Yeah, these issues matter and I'm not happy about them, but we need serious people to lead and guide our country. And I'm looking at someone like a Dr. Oz or Herschel Walker, and I don't see the gravity of a thoughtful person who can work through complicated policy issues and get us through to the other side. So I think that's part of it. And then I think there's also around that too, around the candidates, like, why are you questioning my vote? Like, there's just narrative that no one really challenged, but like as a voter, if you're voting and then someone's like, this election was stolen and then there's a subconscious to it where you're like a voter and you're like, why are you like, this is my vote. Like you question my decisions and my opinion. So all these things kind of from a higher level I think about, but I think that's the takeaway is the emperor may well have no clothes in the White House, but the Republicans are worse off because they don't have a soul and they don't have a real leader right now with values and even on the issues, there's no solutions. So
I think I agree with you on a lot of what you said. I differ slightly on one thing, and I'll get to that. But on the seriousness of the candidates, you're spot on. Right as we sit right now, Lauren Boebert is going to lose her seat in Colorado, which Trump won by 8 points in 2020 when he lost. And she is an unserious candidate. She's a performative clown. And you're right. The times are super serious. And I think there's a problem with a whole group of people that come to a game and say, hey, we want to play this game, but we don't like the rules how the game's played. Unless we win, then we'll like the rules. But if we lose, it's all rigged. I think in 2020, we saw, okay, people challenge the results of an election, and that's a legitimate thing in our democracy. There is recourse for it. The courts are recourse for it. It happens all the time. For those of us who've been involved in this for decades, we know these things happen behind the scenes all the time on nitpicky kind of weird stuff that no one even thinks about. But we've had this collective kind of party approach to where it became a bellwether as to whether or not you are a Republican or not, whether or not you challenge the election or not. Trump lost. Republicans did well in 2020. That's the irony. The message for the Republicans was already there in the details in 2020. Cast this clown aside and you might do well. They didn't do it as much as they tried to. Some did. And so now we have in 2022, a lot of Trump candidates did not do well. They're unserious. They question the rules of the game unless they win, which is just like sour grapes. It's Loserville, and it's unserious. And so I think to your point, you're spot on the seriousness of the candidate. I think on the values, I think what Republicans need to do right now is kind of what you do when you're getting your butt kicked in Risk, right? And say you're kind of tamped down in Australia, and you're like, man, I'm going to lose this game. And you start building and building your troops up, and you start to kind of mount a counterattack. And that's what Florida is for Republicans right now. It is the Australia of Risk. And so DeSantis won Miami-Dade County, my goodness, by double digits, which is unheard of. I think he is the leader of the party for right now, at least maybe not technically, but as far as momentum's concerned. And I think he has an agenda he's run on successfully in the age of COVID. And I think the voters have responded. And I think that's the future. That's why the New York Post has him on the cover today as kind of, anti-MAGA. And I think that's the narrative that's going to carry forward. And it'll be really interesting. I don't think he can declare until spring of next year based on kind of the legislature rules in Florida, but as governor. But what does Trump do between now and then to try to change the narrative that he's a big loser? Because that's what it is right now. Everyone's saying it, and it's the writings on the wall. And the other loser in this, and Thomas, I think you may or may not believe this, but McCarthy's a huge loser. He's gonna have a razor thin majority. He set aside his convictions to kiss Trump's butt during 20. I mean, all this stuff leaks out while they're under attack. He's freaking out, and then flips like that, and is not a strong leader. And so the sidekick, once the strong leader's kicked aside, his sidekick doesn't step in. They kick him aside too, because he was the yes man. So the party is a little wayward, but I think DeSantis did everything he needed to do to have the best night possible to be at least the de facto leader of the party right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating when you're looking at those kind of bigger issues, because everything's been focused on the Senate, where you have these candidates that in these purple states, or in the case of Georgia, a red state, where they're controversial and they're high risk candidates. And so in a state you could easily win as a Republican. So it's interesting, having that in the Senate, but shifting over to the House, we projected, it's at 30 plus seats for Republicans, 22, 21. We're not seeing that. So I think there's something,
you reminding people.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I think there's something there, we're with everybody getting it wrong on that. There's something bigger going on with this. Now, I don't know how it impacts the presidential election, though, because you come up with some of the same dynamics you have now if the Democrats, keep the Senate, and then you have a narrow majority, and there's still, how does that, because the turnout is going to be much, much bigger. This is still, despite the rhetoric on both sides, and we saw a lot of that heading in, where this is the end of the world. We saw that both sides. Whatever happens this midterm is going to, it's going to be the end of the world. It's going to change the country. Democracy is over. Both sides said that. But it's still a midterm, right? It's still just a midterm. The real election is going to be 2024. And so,
which starts right now.
Exactly. So I don't know how these dynamics impact that election when you're kind of having more of the same and people are not happy and you have bigger turnout? So it'll be interesting to see it. I'm still trying to grasp there. Keep in mind that despite the rhetoric, this is still a midterm and the bigger election is 2 years away.
That's fair. I mean, Andy, I have a question for you. Let's say there are 4 or 5 Senate seats outstanding right now. You got Wisconsin, which go to probably to Johnson. Nevada's looking like Republican. We could come down to where the balance of power in the Senate is back in Georgia for a runoff. If that happens, it's going to become a national election. And I think Walker actually has a better chance if that happens. Clearly, if it comes down to the Democrats are holding the line, and now we're just talking about 1 extra seat for them and majority, then Walker, I think, is toast. But is it any chance? What do you think the dynamic will be in Georgia on December 6th? Should all this kind of focus in on it being a national election within the state of Georgia?
I don't know. Because I think the narrative is changed today than it was yesterday based on this result, right? Like, does it fire Republicans up to say we really need to get this over the line so we can control the Senate, or are they going to be disenchanted? Because I was wondering about this election, right? So you look at it and you're like, all right, where does MAGA go from here, right? The far right Republicans in the party, where do they go? And human nature and politics tells me that people are going to start getting upset, and they're either going to, well, typically what happens is when you lose a couple of times, you get really mad about it and people drop out. Some people will double down, but I think the MAGA is like definitely shrinking in terms of who those folks are. And I think they're gonna go back to saying, okay, like, who's gonna be the winner? And I think to your point on DeSantis, like, in the darkness, you head towards the light, and the light's in Florida. It is the sunshine state.
It is indeed.
But it's shining not, it's not shining on Mar-a-Lago, it's shining in Tallahassee where DeSantis is. And I think the race in Georgia for a runoff is going to look like the race right now. I just think the maps are, we say as much as everything's shifting, like the map looks the same as it did 2 years ago, and it's going to look the same 2 years from now. And I think if you're running as Trump, you look at it and say, God, the map didn't change at all. If anything, it got worse for me. Because I look, what I was looking for in particular, and I have to dig into the data, but like Hispanics in the Southwest. So I assume the Hispanics in Florida would go with the Republicans. That whole state's turning red. As a bellwether or a swing state, I think that's in the red column. But like out west, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, those areas, where do those Hispanic communities shift and turn under values and economic issues? So that was one thing. And then the other thing was Michigan. Michigan for me is still the bellwether. I mean, we know that Pennsylvania kind of is still ground zero because of the voter turnout on both sides is so large and is so narrow the margins, but that makes Michigan to me all the more important. And I mean, Michigan voters showed up and put their Democratic governor back in overwhelmingly, and they voted to pass abortion protections. And that tells me that Michigan is going to go Democrat in 2 years because of the fervor that they had. That's not going to subside. So if you're asking me what's going to happen in Georgia, I mean, I really don't know. I think it would favor Walker because there are more Republicans. But will those Republicans show up, or will they be mad? And will they just say this? I'm just not going to come out and vote again. Like, this is, are they going to send a message?
See, I don't know though on the Trump issue. I think people are going to be emboldened, and I think also that even in this election, before the vote counting, there's already things coming in about Arizona and people questioning before the results are even in. So I think there's going to be a narrative that's already started and with this election. And I think that I don't see Trump looking at the map and saying, oh, well, things aren't as good for me. I think he's going to say, I'm going to figure out a way to win. I'm going to come up with a narrative that's going to help that. And I think you're still going to find it'll be a crazy race in Georgia in December if it does come down to that, which is what it looks like. And that could easily decide the fate of the Senate. So, but I don't know. I just think it's not, I don't think it's going to shift that much based on the midterm, but I could be wrong. We'll see what happens.
Can you think of a scenario where you are going to take back control of the House, you're the winner, and the narrative is you lost, and that's what we're sitting in. That's what's kind of weird about this whole thing. Like, then that's what the Republicans are dealing with. And they could have a 50, they could take them, they still can take technically the majority in the Senate. It's probably less likely than not, but they lost. I mean, they won, but they lost. I mean, that's
how many House speakers are going to go through by December if the Republicans take the House? They have two votes, razor thin 2 votes, and McCarthy is going to take this on the chin because he didn't do a great job. And then the NRCC head of the campaigns on this side didn't do a good job. I mean, doesn't matter that you missed why this election was important. We didn't angle that way. It just matters the candidate, like the whole map. So someone's responsible.
I think the narrative on this, there's so many strings you can pull on this. I know we got to wrap up soon, so we got to go to Thomas on trade, but the narratives, literally, you could have Mahoney, the head of the DCCC, lose and have performed better than they were expecting, and the head of the Republican Congressional Committee win and have done worse. I mean, this is just weird, Bill.
Yeah, and to your point on policy, I think it really sets an uncertain stage heading into the lame duck, because we have certain trade items like the generalized system of preferences, the miscellaneous tariff bill. Those have been hanging out there for 2 years now. We've lost 2 years of tariff savings. They're non-controversial for the most part. There's been some controversy that's been inserted into them, but I mean, the last times they've gone through the House, they passed by over 400 members overwhelmingly. And so you've got that ready to go. They need to find a path forward on that issue. But I don't know now if you've got a situation in the Senate where it's coming down to one election that decides the fate of the Senate. It may be hard to focus on getting policy done in those last couple weeks. So I think it plays out. Let's see what happens in Nevada and some of these other states. If Republicans do have control, then I think there's nothing to lose. Go ahead and come up with a deal on this. But if it's a 1-seat majority, then that makes a very uncertain lame duck and puts the chance of this going on. These 2 trade items, which would provide some relief to the industry and to many industries, especially U.S. manufacturers. It puts that into the spring of next year, the summer. It really takes away the whole use of it, because you're only going to end up with a few months of duty savings, if that. So Republicans will have to come up with some sort of solution on this if they do in fact take the House in December or take the Senate in December.
As we wrap up this, and folks, this is the latest edition of Kicks Over Coffee, and we're trying to dissect this from our backgrounds and not go too much into what we're hearing on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, so you can kind of hear our take on it, not talking heads take on it. For me, as we wrap this up, leaving on an optimistic note, the system worked. People stood in line hours to vote, and they waited, and they didn't get out of line, and they weren't dissuaded, and they cast their votes. I'm not really hearing any fraud issues, like this whole
right. Yeah.
Stolen, we're not really hearing too much of that because they got, but I also think there's almost a free market in politics as well, where people get to decide and things get shifted. And all of a sudden, if you got these narrow margins, and we've been talking about how we're a divided country and we got to work together. Well, now you're going to have to work together to get something passed. If you want to get debt ceiling passed, you're going to need Democrat votes and Republican votes in both the House and the Senate. If you're going to pass some major legislation around, getting our fiscal house in order, or taxes, or healthcare, or whatever it is, you got to get votes on both sides. So the American people and the founders' wisdom of setting up the system when we have it created a result of saying, well, now you got to do it, or we won't do anything. So
I do think it behooves many states to look at the success of Florida on getting the vote count out quickly. These laws, you can't open them until the day of, when we're doing all this early voting. Like, it's one thing to have a couple. Back in the day, there should be a couple races that were going to recounts based on law, based on within 10% or whatever. Now it's, or less than 1%. Now it's, there's so many states that are just delayed for days. It seems like we can get our act together provide all different types of avenues to vote, make it easy, but get the count out. I mean, it's just kind of weird when you sit here now and wait and we're just used to it. It's not cool.
Yeah, I don't disagree on that. Well, more to come, I guess. We'll probably have to do this again because
Yeah.
of recounts and rerunning races and everything else. So we'll see you at the runoff edition, I guess, of the Kicks Over Coffee. In the meantime, feel free to go back and listen to the other episodes or any of our shoe and show episodes. And if you have questions about this election or anything that we can help you with, please drop us a line at info@fdra.org. So on behalf of the team here, keep drinking coffee, keep buying, well, there you go. Keep drinking coffee, keep buying kicks, and keep voting, especially those in Georgia. Thanks, guys.
See ya.